Welcome back. You're still watching Network Africa on Channels Television. We've been looking at what's happening in Tunisia. Now, before the break, we did tell you about what Tunisia stands to lose following the massacre which occurred on Friday. Now, we understand it stands to lose $515 million in tourism. I'm being told that we have Dr. Adedipe on the line. He's an economist. And now, I'm sorry, but I'm now being told that we don't have him on the line, so we're going to go to other stories now. Well, we're looking at what's happening in Burundi. Yesterday, we brought you news about the polls in the East African country. We understand that despite the violence in various parts triggered by President Nkurunziza's third-term bid, Burundians went out to vote for a new parliament, and voting appeared slow in several districts for an election boycotted by the opposition and condemned by the international community as lacking the conditions to ensure it was fair.
Yesterday, the Burundi parliamentary elections took place, but based on the recent violence which has plagued the East African country, the turnout was far from plenty. That's because of the number of Burundians who either failed to turn out due to fear of being killed, especially after a night of sporadic gunshots, as well as the number who have fled the country for fear of losing their lives. Some refugees have ended up here in neighboring countries like Rwanda, Tanzania, Kenya, and the Democratic Republic of Congo. According to the UNHCR, more than 6,000 refugees fleeing Burundi have crossed over into Tanzania in the last 3 days, taking to over 66,000 the total number of refugees who've arrived from Burundi. In addition, the UNHCR reports that on Sunday, June the 28th alone, it's registered over 3,000 refugees, 1,000 of them at the Maniovu border point.
Our offices in surrounding countries have been noting a steady increase in arrivals of Burundian refugees. People are telling us they're fleeing the general political instability, election-related violence, armed attacks, and arbitrary arrests.
An appeal launched a month ago by the UNHCR and 17 partners called for $207 million to protect and assist up to 200,000 Burundian refugees.
Just a month ago, UNHCR and partners launched the Regional Refugee Response Plan asking for $207 million. This was to protect and assist up to 200,000 refugees. As you know, the situation in Burundi is deteriorating further. Refugee numbers are increasing. The response plan, though, is funded at 13%.
While a percentage of his people remain displaced, President Nkurunziza is claiming an early victory in Monday's controversial parliamentary poll, despite the opposition of the domestic civic groups and the African Union and the United Nations. Despite the opposition the president faces, he does have his supporters at home, and they insist the elections so far have been free and fair. The African Union and the United Nations have urged the election in Burundi to be delayed, but Nkurunziza insisted that the presidential vote will go ahead as scheduled.
They were thinking there is insecurity. They were thinking the situation in Burundi is not conducive to free, fair elections. But finally, we proved to them that in the country, in Burundi, we can organize elections and secure elections.
The Electoral Commission expects the results to be announced within 3 days, but it declined to comment on the turnout.
Now, we understand that there's news going around which says some of the Chibok schoolgirls who were kidnapped in Nigeria have been forced to join the Islamist militant group Boko Haram. The details of the story say that some of the girls are now being used to terrorize other captives and are even carrying out killings themselves. It's very important to note that the testimony cannot be verified by Amnesty International, but it's saying that other girls kidnapped by Boko Haram have been forced to fight. Well, we're joined from London now by an Amnesty International researcher, Daniel Eyre. He joins us right now on the program. Daniel, thank you very much for joining us on Network Africa.
Thank you for having me on the show.
It's always a pleasure. Now, what more can you tell us about this story?
Well, this story is coming from the BBC, and they say that they've interviewed people who have given them testimony saying that some of the Chibok girls have been trained as fighters. At Amnesty, we're not able to confirm that story, but it is consistent with what some of the women and girls that have been released from Boko Haram camps have told us. Back in April of this year, we released a 90-page report about war crimes and crimes against humanity by Boko Haram. Women told us, we found that more than 2,000 women and girls have been abducted by Boko Haram, and that they've suffered appalling treatment at the hands of the group. We've documented cases where women have been forced into marriage with Boko Haram. We've even spoken to people who told us about cases of rape where Boko Haram has just gone into people's homes when they've taken control of a town and repeatedly sometimes raped women and girls living there. We've also heard that some girls have in fact been trained as fighters, trained to use explosives, and even gone on operations with Boko Haram. And as you know, there's increasing evidence that Boko Haram has been using girls in some of the suicide bomb attacks on places such as Maiduguri in northeast Nigeria. So it's consistent with this pattern of abuse that we've discovered.
Well, Daniel, is there any way to know for certain that these girls who are being referred to are actually the Chibok girls?
It's very difficult to know at this point. I mean, the way that we work at Amnesty is we try and get independent corroboration from multiple sources of any findings that we release. And so we've had enough evidence to say that some have been trained in this way. It's very difficult to know exactly where a specific individual comes from. Some of the women that we've spoken to say that they were put together for mass re-education in Boko Haram's interpretation of Islam. So every day they were required to go to schools, but they weren't really allowed to talk to one another. So they might find out that a girl is from, or a woman is, they might find out their name, they might find out that they've come from a specific area of Borno State, but it's quite difficult to get very specific information about who someone is or where they're from in these conditions where they're not really allowed to communicate with one another.
Well, Danny, just before I let you go, I have to ask at this point, how long will it take for us to know for certain if what the BBC is saying is true?
Well, it's hard to say. I mean, some women and girls have begun to be released now that the army has made very good progress in taking back some of these towns from Boko Haram control, taking back some camps that Boko Haram were using. We have had, hundreds now of women and girls recovered from the group, and they've started to give information about what's been going on there. We know some of the locations that these women and girls have come from, but it's going to be a while yet. It won't be until, I imagine, until Boko Haram is defeated and all civilians that they captured, men, boys, women, girls, until they've all been recovered from the group, that we're able to get the true story of what's happened there.
Well, Daniel, as always, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for joining us on Network Africa.
Thank you.
Daniel Eyre is an Amnesty International researcher speaking to us from London. Well, still to come on Network Africa. Accuses South Sudan government forces of abusing and even burning women alive. We'll have details for you shortly. Please stay with us.